Bang ding ding, trademark. He come out 6'7" tall. Bang ding ding, one is star. Bang dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding. It is a perfect day.
Woke up to the sound of the garbage truck again. Upstairs neighbor's toilet's leaking on my head. Cars broke down, I missed the bus, there runs a 10. I had a feeling this was a day to stay in bed. I finally left my pad right on the jumbo's cloud room. A police officer pulled out his gun and said, I said, sir, you got the wrong guy. I guess it's just the perfect day. It's just the perfect day. Na, 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 na.
Hey guys, welcome back to another great episode of Eggs. I'm back. Yeah, just for the week, just for this episode. I have, I think, 3 or 4 more weeks left in my coding boot camp, and then we can start doing things like normal again. It is holiday break, and Ryan and his wife and family are on vacation, so it's just going to be me today, which is good. We haven't talked in a while, so yeah. And because it is the holidays and a new year has begun, it's time for us to do our annual Eggy Awards show. For those of you who haven't heard an Eggy's Awards show yet and don't know what it is, essentially it's an award show. Yeah. We go over 4 or 5 different categories. I play a lot of sound effects, and we pick the winners of each category and play a little clip of their episode. So there you go. That's the Eggy Awards show. So let's get on with it, shall we? The very first category that we are going to cover in the award show is finance. And we had a number of really good conversations with people regarding this topic, but one stood out in particular, and that person was Paul Hickey. So the winner of the finance category, again, is Paul Hickey.
So after you finished school, you decided to go into business. We just talked a little bit briefly about your telework company. You know, what did the trajectory look like from there?
Yeah, so this is a fascinating story as an entrepreneurial story. I started that business, and today I have more knowledge in my pinky about how to run a company than I had in my entire body when I started that company. And guess what? The very first year, I had no budget, no business plan. I just thought, this is a good business to get into. I had some experience with it, a little from this other company I worked with. And I just, had some money I saved up, and I kind of figured it ended up, looking back, I spent about $30,000 to start this company before it started cash flowing on its own. The first year I made $495,000 profit. Second year I made a $1.1 million profit. And I just thought, that's what happens when you start a company. I had no idea how lucky I was. And the luck and the what happened there is I just timed it perfectly. And, I'll probably come back to this theme of timing. It's one of the most important but misunderstood and not appreciated aspects of being successful as an entrepreneur is timing. And by the way, my mask business is a huge timing thing. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But I just timed the market just right. And the first 3 years were just easy, money flooding in. And I remember my accountant, my bookkeeper, we didn't even have a CFO, walked into my office one day, like in the second year, and she said, "You have $1 million of cash sitting in our checking account, not making any interest." Because we were just adding cash flow every week, and we're just running the business, growing it. It was just paying for itself. Do you want to do something with that? And I kind of sat back and I'm like, you are stupid. I'm talking to myself now, by the way. You're not even managing the cash that you're earning. That's how easy it was for me. And that worked against me when all of a sudden things were hard and I needed money. because that was really, I was in for a big surprise and a big shock and a real painful learning experience. Unlike a lot of entrepreneurs who have the pain up front to get the money to launch their business and to grow it, I didn't go through any of that in my first 3 years. So what happened is the industry changed. The internet emerged in the mid 90s and 900 numbers fell out of favor. Everything was going internet. And I remember my guy that was in charge of our internal network. Remember when companies used to have their own networks because there was no internet?
Yeah.
And my guy that was my networking guy, full-time guy, walked into the office one day in the 90s. He's like, hey, this really interesting company called Yahoo is doing an IPO. You should check it out. And of course, I completely ignored it. I was just focused on how do I save this business because we're getting killed by the internet. And what we did is we did a pivot, and it was the best pivot I've done to date. But we transitioned into prepaid calling cards because those were growing in the late 90s. And we built a technology because back then, the prepaid calling cards were just hard cards with a little thing you'd pin on the back, you'd scratch it off. And then they sell them in retail stores. So we built a little piece of hardware. I hired a bunch of engineers, and we built this hardware. It looks like a credit card terminal. And we would get the PIN numbers from all the carriers and put them on our server, and then put this little piece of hardware in 7-Elevens and other places that sold prepaid calling cards. And then when a customer would walk in and say, I want a $100 prepaid calling card from AT&T, the clerk would push AT&T, $100, it would dial out, grab a PIN, and then it would print the calling card out on demand. And then we would get a transaction fee for every one of those. And so it was this amazing business model where the carriers gave me the pins for free. I paid no inventory. I kept them until I collected the money, and then I paid them. And then the retail stores would pay us for our hardware that we then made money on every single day as people were buying these cards. That business, I rebranded and called it QCOM. And that business I took through an IPO. It did so well, I IPO'd that, got listed on the American Stock Exchange in 2003. And that was just a great success. And we licensed our technology around the world. We had partners in Canada and Australia and France and the Bahamas, and got royalty fees from all of them doing the same thing in their countries. So wonderful experience.
So, most startups and people in their entry levels of running a business don't have $1 million sitting in their bank account. Usually they don't hit a home run on their first try.
Right.
Do you think without that initial success, you would have been able to roll something like that out? And also, how important was your network that you developed at business college? Did that help you succeed over, just what you had personally? Was your network critical in making that IPO happen?
Yeah. So first question, if I hadn't had that early success, I would not have been able to do what I did, because I had the resources. I had a core staff that was pivoting with me. Some people had to go, and I had to bring in some new people. And if I would have just looked at that business and said, I need to do this, it would have been, I don't think I wouldn't have had the experience in the telecom industry that I had from the 900 business. That's one of the reasons I was able to pivot into it, because I had the equipment, the contracts with the carriers and everything else. And I had a big network in the telecom space that helped me to pivot into that really well. So no, I couldn't have done it without my previous success and network. And then did college help me with my network? No. I didn't network that well in college, and I didn't really leverage any of my relationships from college kind of going forward. They were all new relationships I was making from industry contacts and customers and vendors and so forth.
Yeah, I've heard that, one of the reasons you go to Harvard Business School is for the network.
That is the reason.
Yeah, I've heard that BYU Business College is actually similar. And that's why I was kind of curious, is that lots of times those networks kind of open doors for you down the road. So, yeah, it wasn't, I never really leveraged it, but yes to Harvard and Stanford. Yeah, that's, those relationships are valuable for the rest of your life,
Well, then let's talk a little bit about what became sort of your expertise, which is raising money. So as we said in the introduction, you've raised money for, 20 of your own businesses, which, seems to, or I guess sort of leads me to believe that, not every one of these businesses started out, from nothing, but maybe weren't as strong. You needed to raise money or something to grow these businesses. And so you've got a lot of experience now doing that stuff and raising money. So let's talk about, I guess, trying to put ourselves back in the shoe of maybe, version 1 you, when you were launching your first business and you were starting to grow, you're starting to do these things. How and when do we know we need money?
Yeah, well, so most businesses don't get off the ground with some money and a budget of, this is what I need to start the business and launch it. And then this is what I need once I launch it to grow it. And those are kind of the two first fundamental questions of how much do I need to start it? And then how much am I going to need to grow it in the first phase? And, most entrepreneurs have a budget that's wrong. And I can tell you the number one mistake that they make is that they underestimate how much money they need. It's very common. And they're doing that for two reasons. One, they're trying to be, prudent with their money, but two, they're trying to be diluted less, right? And this dilution thing is really one of the main reasons why entrepreneurs either don't go and try and raise money or they fail at raising money because they're afraid of getting too diluted, selling too much of their company when they raise the money. And I just want to address that really quick because I think this will help anybody that's out there thinking of raising money. The first, when it comes to dilution, the best way to become a billionaire is to dilute yourself. If you think about the richest people in the world, Elon Musk, the Google boys, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, they all own less than 20% of their companies. Every single one of them, the richest guys in the world. And, I meet entrepreneur after entrepreneur that it's worried about, they want 17% of my company. I only want to offer 12%. There's a story, Jeff Bezos, who at one point in the early years, Amazon had been going for 2 or 3 years and he needed $1 million. And he sold 10% of Amazon for $1 million at one point.
Can you imagine?
Wow. You could get 3 shares of stock for that now.
Yeah. So he, he's like, I had to do what I had to do. That is the right attitude. He's the richest guy in the world. Or I think it's Elon passed him recently. It's close, kind of neck and neck.
They flip flop every other week.
Yeah, right. So, the first thing I want to say is if you're out there raising money, your path to being super wealthy accelerates when you raise money. Now you got to raise it the right way. I'm not saying over dilute yourself, be careless, just, of course, be careful, but that's how you're going to grow faster. And that's how your net worth is going to increase faster is through diluting yourself. That's number one. So,
and I'd like to, if you don't mind, can we talk about that just one moment longer? So you mentioned, I saw a video on your website where you were talking about dilution, and it's funny because I fell exactly into the stereotype that you sort of discussed there, but it's sort of the difference between the American entrepreneur and the Chinese entrepreneur.
Yes.
You in your background spent a lot of time in China doing work over there. And, became very close to the Chinese business culture. And then also as an American entrepreneur yourself, you've seen that side too. So do you mind talking about sort of the differences between those two things? Because I think that little bit of clarity to this idea of dilution, because I'm sure, I can speak for many entrepreneurs right now that are going, well, Jesus, I don't want to give the whole thing away. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, the Chinese are a really interesting contrast to American entrepreneurs, Chinese entrepreneurs. And one of the things that is just, I don't know if it's genetic, it's in their culture, but cash is king in China. Stock is just paper. Cash is what makes things happen. And so a lot of entrepreneurs in China that right when they're starting out, if they've got a friends and family, and the Chinese network, really well, comparatively to Americans when it comes to raising money. So they've got a pretty good startup network to begin with friends and family and business people that they know. And it is not unusual for a Chinese startup, the first round of funding they get, 50% goes to the guy who writes the check to get them started. 50%. Now, American entrepreneurs, you tell them they're going to give up 50% for the first 100,000 or 500,000 or whatever they're raising. They're just like, no, oh, that's way too much. It's too good for the investor. China, they're happy. They're like, wow, I get 50% of the company and you're paying for all of it? That's the best deal ever, right? And so there's a real different attitude. And then, of course, a lot of these Chinese entrepreneurs go on to become very, very wealthy because they got the capital they needed to get started. And then maybe they needed some more capital. And, once again, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, they all own less than 20% of their companies. So, I think American entrepreneurs, this is the key thing here. They undervalue capital. Hey, I'm the guy with the idea. I'm doing all the work. Why should he get 50% of the company? All he's doing is writing a check and I'm doing everything else. That is the wrong attitude. That's how you're going to lose in trying to raise money. You're going to lose that game. The fact is, the investor, because I've been on all sides of the table. I've been an angel investor in startups. I've been raised money for my startups. I've been an investment banker in the middle, raising money for startups and from angel investors and VCs and private equity funds. And so I've seen every side of this for 20 years. And I can tell you, you need to understand as an entrepreneur raising money, the mindset of the investor. And the investor is, hey, I'm executing. When I write the check, I've done my job. Now it's time for you to do your job. And if you don't do your job, then I should somehow get compensated for that, which is, some of these deals where if you don't perform, then you can lose control of the company. A lot of entrepreneurs hate that idea, but they performed and you didn't. So now it's time to try and make something of that investment to try to revive it. Investors don't want control of the companies. I can tell you, angel investors and VCs, their fantasy investment is to write a check and never hear from you for 3 years and then get a big exit check in the mail. That's what they want. They don't want to be involved in your business and helping you. And you're running out of money again, and I need to help you raise money. And you guys did something stupid and hurt your sales. And now I got to figure out how I can help you guys to save my investment. They don't want that. They don't want any of that. They want to write a check, you go execute, and send me a check in 3 years from now. That's what they really want.
All right, that was Paul Hickey. Now you know why he kind of won that finance category. He kind of, he's got that on lockdown. Anyways, up next, we have a really cool topic. It's hydrogen and clean energy. I guess clean energy would be a better topic because while we did interview a few hydrogen experts, Amit Roy had the portable solution that he could provide clean air and oxygen and make hydrogen at the same time for like hospitals. So it's really cool application use. We also talked to Andrew Murphy, who was the first guest that we kind of talked about hydrogen with, and that was an amazing conversation. We also talked to the podcaster Just Have a Think. What's his name? David Borlas. His whole channel is about sustainability and climate change and how we can solve big problems quickly. We also interviewed Greg Vizina, who built in the 80s a ammonia-powered car. And we talked about how ammonia and hydrogen work together and how it's a good solution for storage for hydrogen. So anyways, out of all of those guests that were on clean energy and that topic, the one that we chose as the Eggy Award winner for this year is Andrew Murphy. He answered so many good questions about why we need to start using hydrogen as an alternative fuel source. And I'm so excited to see it coming around. So definitely check all those episodes out. But the winner of the clean energy category is Andrew Murphy.
But can you talk about the difference between a hydrogen combustion engine and a hydrogen fuel cell and how it works? I know that there's been videos of the guys that create a combustion engine out of their old truck and burn hydrogen and say, oh, we're making, there's no downside to doing this, and we're running off of water, and it just puts water out in the back. But I've also heard that by doing a combustion engine, it emits nitrous oxide. Is that correct? And what are the downsides of doing the combustion versus a fuel cell system?
Well, there's upsides and downsides to both, which is interesting. So internal combustion engines have been around for 100 and something years. They're very well understood and they're relatively cheap. So you can convert your standard diesel engine to run on hydrogen, and you can run it on hydrogen, which isn't particularly clean. The downside there is it's not the most efficient way to use your fuel. So the amount of energy you have in your hydrogen, you may be getting, say, 30-40% max coming out of your crankshaft in your car. However, doing a conversion is relatively cheap, and there are some really interesting companies out there, like the likes of Ulemco, who are converting diesel vehicles to be dual fuel, so run on hydrogen and on diesel, which is really nice. So if you already have an existing fleet and it's only a couple of years old and you don't really want to replace anything and invest in new technology, then going down that route is fine. It also means that when you don't have the ability to refuel on hydrogen, you can carry on using diesel. In terms of hydrogen fuel cells, that's a different technology. It's a lot newer. Hydrogen fuel cells, I think, were used in the Apollo mission, but they were very primitive to what you get today. But now you can get a 100 kilowatt fuel cell in your vehicle, in your Toyota Mirai, and essentially it takes air on one side, passes the air on one side of the fuel cell. You have a tank of high pressure hydrogen in the back, so that's 700 bar, so about 700 atmospheres pressure in carbon fiber tanks. Passed through a valve, and essentially there's a chemical reaction across the fuel cell, oxygen on one side, hydrogen on the other. Hydrogen passes across, generates water, and meanwhile there's electricity generated in a current, and that electricity is tapped off. And once your electricity is tapped off, everything else there is essentially the same as your battery electric vehicle. So hydrogen fuel cell vehicles are electric vehicles. It's just that the energy is not stored in a battery. It's stored in a chemical fuel, which is hydrogen, and it's released by being passed through a fuel cell.
So is there any downside to having a pressurized carbon fiber tank to store your hydrogen on your car? Is there is it like a what's it called? A gremlin? If you get hit in the back, it just explodes.
Really interesting videos out there. Done, I think it was by Volkswagen or BMW maybe 15 years ago, where they had two identical vehicles, one with a gasoline tank and one with a hydrogen tank, and pierced them. I think it was with a forklift truck, but other people had done it with bullets and things. And in the space of about 30 seconds, because hydrogen is so light, it comes out, goes straight up and burns, and then it's gone. With your gasoline, it comes out, pools around your car, combusts, and spends the next 5 minutes incinerating your vehicle. So if I was trapped inside a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, which had a punctured tank, versus a similar car with gasoline in there, I'd much rather choose the hydrogen tank. And people say, well, hydrogen is explosive. So is most liquid fuel, right? Don't smoke at a normal refueling station. Don't smoke at a hydrogen station. And I've worked on developing hydrogen refuelers, and I can say without a doubt that is safer. You go to fill up your normal car, you can smell fumes, right? That's all stuff that can burn. Hydrogen refueling, there's just really minimal risk. And probably at some point in the future, there'll be some accidents, but I'd guarantee really that the amount of accidents and the severity are going to be below what you get from your normal refueling.
Well, yeah, I think that that's a good point to bring up, though, that there's no free lunch, right? I mean, if you want combustion, like you're going to have some sort of chemical reaction. And it makes a lot of sense that, I mean, okay, if gasoline and hydrogen will both explode, but one explodes less, like, okay, that's still an improvement, even if it still explodes. So I think it's good to kind of point that out. I wonder if you wouldn't talk a little bit about sort of the, I mean, we're talking a little bit about future technologies and things like that, but I wonder if you wouldn't just sort of talk about hydrogen. We talked briefly before the show about hydrogen has actually been around a lot longer than we think it has. I think, people who haven't done extensive research or haven't, gone down the YouTube rabbit holes have, maybe a cursory relationship with hydrogen. And I wonder if you just sort of talk about it as a evolving technology.
Well, and I think Honda has been working on hydrogen automobiles since the early 80s. So it's not even just, the crazy guy that, understands a lot and does it in his garage. Commercial applications have been working on it for a long time. So
if you look at kind of GM and Ford as well, and most of these other companies, they've all done some work on hydrogen vehicles. BMW back late 90s, early 2000s, looked at hydrogen vehicles fueled by liquid hydrogen, which is interesting. That didn't go anywhere. But it's all the improvements we're seeing these days are based off kind of learnings of the past. We couldn't have got to where we are without that in the past. And as I kind of mentioned before the show, there's about 70 million tons of hydrogen produced worldwide every year, but you don't generally see it. Most of it's produced next door to a refinery or produced next door to a fertilizer plant. It goes across the fence and is immediately going into your fuel or your chemicals or your fertilizer. Now, the issue with that is most of it's coming from natural gas or gasification of really nasty residues from our refinery. So nobody makes really a big deal about it. It stays in the pipe and it gets processed. The hydrogen is fine. You can use it for all these kind of energy transition applications like fuel cell vehicles or internal combustion engine vehicles. It needs purifying a bit, but at the end of the day, the fact it's coming from a fossil fuel to begin with means that there's CO2 coming out somewhere. So the real big transition for hydrogen that we're seeing now is, although there's 70 million tons a year being produced, is that we need to replace some of that with greener hydrogen. Now we need to have applications which, when they come online, are using green hydrogen rather than kind of high CO2 hydrogen to begin with. So,
and I think, sorry, Mike, go ahead.
I was going to say, so the difference between like a green hydrogen versus just a byproduct of what the refineries are doing now is the refining process. There's a lot of different tech out there to actually make hydrogen, and there's steam-based electrolysis and different options. And I think you mentioned earlier that the ability to like have excess, like power from like the solar abilities and the wind generation, it's allowing us to do electrolysis to create the hydrogen without really having any downside because we're using renewable resources to create it in the first place. Is that correct?
That's right. I mean, historically, if you look at the prices for renewables, they've been quite high. And also the cost of your electrolyzers to produce hydrogen. So electrolyzers split water, kick out oxygen, which you can use or throw away, and then you keep the hydrogen. But they've been expensive. The cost has really come down, and there's some great cost projections there as well. But the cost of the power now from renewables is just so competitive with everything. I look at kind of solar bids in Portugal last year, where they were bid was 1.3 cents per kilowatt hour. So almost free. And they're putting in so many solar arrays and wind turbines in places. We have times when there's electricity with negative value. So we can get the cost of the electricity down, and we can get the cost of the electrolyzers down. Then you don't even have to run your electrolyzers 100% of the time. And their efficiency has gone up so much that when you do run them, you can start to get to the position where you're using green electricity to produce green hydrogen close to the cost of, your fossil hydrogen. And in the future, probably hopefully less than the cost of your fossil hydrogen.
Yeah. So if I'm understanding this correctly, I mean, is that sort of what you would attribute, I guess, sort of this up and to the right chart of hydrogen use and things like that is, even though it's, not necessarily the newest technology, I think you mentioned that they were using some version of a hydrogen cell on the Apollo missions. But, the efficiency with which we can make the conversions now and the way that we can actually apply the stuff now, is that, I guess, why it's starting to I guess sort of start to shine now is we're starting to see more and more hydrogen use because technology's finally caught up to it?
Some of it is politics. Some of it just happens to be the right place at the right time, and a lot of it is the technology. So if you look at Apollo, I don't know how much the hydrogen fuel cell for that cost, but it'll be in the millions, probably tens of millions by today. Big, primitive, probably reliable because it went used in space. But these days, it have to be produced in the tens of thousands, be a lot smaller and be much more efficient. And all the components that are going in there's a lot of really good engineering expertise for modeling the flow of the gases. And these are the things that let everything become much more reliable, a lot smaller. And when it's smaller, you need less materials, and less materials mean easier to produce cheaply. So we kind of into a virtuous cycle now. Because it's cheaper, people will buy more of them. That means there's more use. That means there's more room for cost down. And when it's cheaper, again, people will buy more of them.
Well, and is there more room to grow on this technological front? Like, I mean, are we going to continue to refine, and this will be the process that we start to, I guess maybe eventually eclipse our reliance on fossil fuels?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I'm in a lot of conversations with different suppliers and technology developers, and I never fail to be kind of amazed at some of these developments that are going on there. And I realize people are very optimistic, so even tasting it with taking a pinch of salt. I've seen some very real projections from some very good companies for the cost of producing these fuel cells. And we're talking not 25, 50, 75% reductions on today's price, even more. And today's price is a lot cheaper than it was 5, 6, 7 years ago. And when it gets to that level, then suddenly your powertrain for your vehicle from your fuel cell is actually way cheaper than it would be for a diesel powertrain. So why would you choose diesel when you can have a fuel cell? And the answer for that is you want your hydrogen to be not too expensive when you sell it. And that's where the other part of the equation we discussed comes in. So you can get your green hydrogen. It's cheap because cheap electrolysis, cheap renewables to power that. So we're in a virtuous cycle now. There's still some work to do, but it's a very positive position to be in.
Well, so they already have fleets of taxis and city buses and all sorts of different vehicles that are running on hydrogen. And the cost of producing the hydrogen right now is fairly expensive. So it's cost per gallon of gas, for example, is cheaper than a gallon of or liter of hydrogen. So by having the tech become more prevalent, more people producing it, I assume that's going to go down. A lot of the problems as far as like creating and storing hydrogen comes in, like there's no systems in place right now for gas stations to be able to store it, the transporting of the hydrogen to get to the gas station. I've heard a lot of the gas stations that have the hydrogen capability right now are producing it on site.
That's right.
Is that going to be kind of the model? Are most of the places that are going to be able to provide hydrogen solutions for consumers, are they going to essentially just have to create their own process of making it and storing it on site?
That's actually a brilliant question. So currently there are 3 different types of hydrogen stations for vehicles. And they're basically broken down into some stations where it's delivered by a pipeline. They've built a station near a hydrogen pipeline that happens to be nearby. They've tapped it off, purify the hydrogen. That's the kind of best case scenario because somebody's already paid for the infrastructure. There's other ones where it's delivered as compressed gas. I led a modeling effort a while ago to look at the economics of that. So for the first 150 miles, maybe, it's kind of economic to deliver it by truck and have it, shipped in. But beyond that, then electrolysis tends to be the cheapest way to, produce it on site, really. And with the cost of on-site production coming down, then the kind of the window of attractiveness for delivered hydrogen starts to shrink. So there's always going to be some hydrogen delivered, but it looks more and more likely that a lot of it will be produced on site via electrolysis, and in some cases you can produce it on site through natural gas reforming as well. So there's a couple of options there.
So what do you think?
Oh, go ahead, Ryan.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, so what do you think? I mean, how do we make this attractive to the big fuel companies, for example? I mean, not to ask you to give any like inside dirt on Shell's thinking or anything, but like, if I'm, running a chain of gas stations or, something like that, when will I know, or are there things we can do to expedite the demand for this product? I mean, obviously, if it's physically capable to produce on site, that's one hurdle. But the other hurdle is if I'm going to invest in all that infrastructure, how do I make sure I've got enough of a crowd to buy it? So like, what do you think that transition looks like?
His father actually owns a truck stop. So he's wanting some inside information for his dad.
I could probably recommend after this some providers of equipment if your dad's interested.
Excellent.
But so it comes down to cost, right? Nobody wants to spend a huge amount of money putting this infrastructure in the ground, and nearly every hydrogen refueling site now, there's some level of funding through either through kind of say California government or the German government or UK funding in various countries. None of these sites are paying for themselves, and the reason they're not paying for themselves is they were expensive to put in. These days they're becoming more and more similar, so the cost is coming down, which is great, but it comes down to demand. So if you have a station that's only dispensing 5% of the amount of hydrogen it could per day, you're never going to pay for it. If you've got a station that's got 95% utilization, you start to make some money on that. So it does come down to utilization. It comes down to knowing where the vehicles are going to go in and knowing which vehicles are going to use a lot of fuel. So your normal car, you got your Camry or something, if they decide to go over to hydrogen, fuel cells on that, or you have a Toyota Mirai, still not going to use much fuel unless it's being used as a taxi. But if you're doing haulage, you've got a Class 8 truck, and these are blasting up and down the freeway continuously, they will burn a lot of fuel. I mean, that can be diesel, or it can be hydrogen, or it can be something else, and they'll need to refuel. So the best idea is to put these hydrogen refueling stations where there will be high demand, and that means working with these truck companies to say, look, if you go over to hydrogen, we may even put a refueling station at your depot where your trucks go overnight, so you don't have to worry about that. But show us what your main routes are. We're going on this highway. Where do you normally want to refuel? And we will put in refueling stations along there. And then suddenly you start to develop hubs, and kind of a hub and spoke model. And it encourages other companies who maybe only have a couple of trucks to get involved because they know they can refuel too. That increases your profitability. You can put in more stations. More stations means the cost of stations gets cheaper. So that's really how I see the kind of profitability coming up and the cost going down.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, because I mean, it's kind of this chicken and the egg thing, right? You don't want to just build stations when there's no demand, but we need the chickens to start running on hydrogen, and so that they can, so they need it.
Ryan,
so it makes sense to do it in private ventures like that.
Ryan, if you think like 10, 15 years ago, there weren't charging stations for your Tesla at every super mall or gas stations or, along the major corridors. But now if you drive, from Idaho to Washington, there's, fuel charging stations all along that route because the demand is there. So it's worth the investment. And I honestly see the same thing happening with hydrogen in the next 10 years. The same kind of, the cars are going to start showing up and they're going to be out there and there's going to be a demand for it. And then at that point is when you're going to start seeing them pop up. As far as, like a fuel cell vehicle, Tesla's out there right now. And if you look at a Tesla, their battery pack is literally the entire bottom of their car. It's huge. And they're doing that so they can get more range out of the vehicle. But with a hydrogen fuel cell setup, the battery can be a lot smaller because it doesn't necessarily need that size for the range. So by having that as a workaround, you can actually get a lot further without having to stop, charge, and go. And it's also takes up less space in the vehicle, and it's not as heavy, because the lithium ion batteries that Tesla's using right now they're super heavy, and it requires, bigger brake pads, bigger motor to power it, all sorts of different things that come into play by having that larger battery. And by having the hydrogen option in a smaller battery, it creates a smaller footprint, and you can do more with it. So I'm really excited to see how that works. Am I on the right? Did I describe that right, Andrew?
Yeah, very, very well, actually. That becomes really important when you look at things like trucking, because beyond a certain point, you don't want to keep adding batteries to get distance, because your batteries have so much weight, then you're just paying to haul battery, right? With hydrogen, you can just add a few extra kilograms of hydrogen. So that doesn't take up much extra weight, and the further you drive, the more fuel you use, the weight goes down. So for heavy vehicles and for vehicles going a long way, then hydrogen is very attractive. I've seen things out there like hydrogen scooters for around the town. There's no point for that. You can charge up, from your wall socket at home and use a small battery. But if you're trying to go a long way, if you're trying to haul a lot of weight, then hydrogen becomes very attractive. And no matter how fast you can recharge with a Tesla supercharger, I think there's like 100 kilowatts, 140 kilowatt charging. You were talking the equivalent charging rate for hydrogen is in the megawatt range. You can refuel a car in 4 or 5 minutes. You can refuel a lorry or a bus in under 15. Whereas if you had 17 tons of batteries in a Class 8 truck, you are not going to recharge those in 15 minutes, and they're going to get very hot while you're doing that.
All right, that was Andrew Murphy. And as you could tell, he's very knowledgeable on the subject of hydrogen. He's worked on a lot of big projects. You should really go and listen to the whole conversation, because that's just a portion of it. The next one that we have is authors. And we had 2 or 3 really good authors, but the one that stood out to us more than any other is Todd Henry. Todd wrote The Accidental Creative. He also wrote a book called Louder Than Words, which I really enjoy and recommend. You should definitely check out all his books. They are available on Audible. And I should note that when we interviewed Todd, he had some bad internet issues, and that caused for some poor audio quality. So please forgive that. The conversation was still great. We just had a couple dropouts, and there's a weirdness with his voice. So, yeah, ignore that and pay attention to what he says. And without any further delay, here is a clip of our conversation with Todd Henry.
You actually have the honor of being the very first author in my Audible library. Very first book I ever bought.
I love that. It's great.
Yeah, Birds. Z-Trip tweeted about it, and I was like, I'll check this out. And got Audible, and I downloaded this book, and that led into I have over 100 purchased audiobooks now, and everything from Accidental Creative, Louder Than Words, Simon Sinek, all the good ones stemmed from your book. So thank you so much.
Fantastic. But when I saw that incredible vinyl collection behind you, I should have known that Z-Trip was involved somehow in this whole thing.
Yeah.
Yep. No doubt. Well, and it's really funny. So we've been doing this show for going on almost 4 years now, and we're, you'll be somewhere near episode 194 or 5, something like that. And your books, I come from the advertising industry, so I'm sort of a creative in the sense that I'm an art director, designer by trade. And Mike actually introduced your book to me shortly after having discovered it himself. And Mike comes to creativity through sort of the music side. So he's a director or a DJ and club producer, where I came into music through, I was a tour manager and stuff like that for a while. And so we spent we have all these interesting creative crossroads, but they both sort of manifest through your book. So it's kind of an interesting amalgamation of things, I suppose.
Well, it's great to know that work can cross over, right? I mean, I guess it kind of shows us like creativity is creativity. I mean, if you're solving problems, you're solving problems regardless of your industry. And, a lot of the same dynamics and pressures and pitfalls and all of that affect all of us, regardless of our profession, regardless of the kinds of problems we're solving, whether it's music or it's, advertising or creative or design or copywriting or entrepreneurship. Creativity is problem solving. And so, I think often we don't see those commonalities, but it's great to see that playing out here.
Well, and it's funny too, from the beginning of this podcast, we had in our early days, we had a really hard time sort of classifying what it was we did. Right. And we were talking to our friends mostly in the early phases, who do we interview? Oh, well, call some guy, And, but what we started to notice after we developed a little bit of a backlog was that there's this creative thread that runs through everybody. It's just a matter of how we apply it, right? So we were talking to musicians and artists and startup founders and CEOs and, all these different people. But what fuels them is all the same thing, whatever it is, this creative thread or this juice that exists in all of us. And so I wondered if we could start going back a little bit on your creative juice and see if we could maybe understand a little bit, how you got to where you are today. I mean, obviously we know you as an author and a convention speaker and the guys doing the business circuits, but what was it like before that? How did you get into this?
And actually, I know you played in a band before. You were a musician, and I tried to look you up to see who you were and see what it was all about. And there's two bands that I found that out. The only thing I could find is there's a reggae band with your name. It's like an old, not you. And I figured that probably was the case. And then I found an article from 2001 as a country singer. Is this correct?
That would be correct. Yes. I think that is the only thing in existence that in any capacity, speaks about this whole deal. I'm almost 50 now. So I did all my experimentation pre-Google, which was kind of nice, because none of that really exists anymore. As a matter of fact, when people ask me about building a personal brand, I say, well, the best way to do it is just go back and do all of your experimenting before Google was a thing. And then you don't have to worry about it. You can build it from scratch. But yeah, so I studied marketing in college. And then, to your point, I paid a big chunk of my way through college by playing music, performing, writing, songwriting, traveling, performing shows. And so I thought, maybe I'll make a go of this. So I spent a significant amount of time in Nashville. I'm based in Cincinnati, Ohio. So I was playing shows. I was in Nashville. I was writing music, collaborating with people some of whom went on to do amazing things, But yeah, I actually played West Coast Bakersfield country music, sort of Buck Owens, Dwight Yoakam, the Mavericks, that kind of stuff. Got to do a bunch of great shows with the Dixie Chicks at the time. Diamond Rio and Toby Keith and Kenny Chesney, and got to play all these incredible shows, and it was really fun. And at the same time realized as anybody who's been associated with the music business knows, it's either it goes or it doesn't, right? There's kind of this giant middle ground where it's really hard to make a living in the music business. And so just realize I don't think this is probably the best path forward long term. And I wanted to, get married and have a family and all that. So, life doing that is not as easy. So, ended up through a variety of circumstances, ended up getting a job as a creative director for a nonprofit, which was fantastic. Spent the next decade doing that, leading teams, building a team of people. We built a team to, 36 or so people over the course of that time. And in the midst of that, as I was trying to lead this team, as I was trying to figure out how do I keep them what I began to call prolific, brilliant, and healthy at the same time, realized that many of the other organizations in our city, the creative directors, are having similar conversations. So I started just getting together with people who were creative directors, executive creative directors from some of the biggest firms in our city. Cincinnati I know a lot of people who aren't familiar with it think like Cincinnati, like Ohio, what? But, we're the home of Procter & Gamble. We're the home of Macy's. We're the home of Kroger. There are several huge companies that are based here, and Procter & Gamble is kind of the cradle of brands, right? So there are all these design and creative agencies, brand firms here in Cincinnati dedicated to serving basically Procter & Gamble or Kroger or Macy's or some of these companies that are built here or based here. So there's a big creative presence here. So spent a lot of time kind of working with them and sort of just asking questions and sort of seeing what they were asking, and realized there needs to be a forum to talk about the pressure to create on demand. So in 2005, started a podcast called The Accidental Creative, kind of on a whim. Didn't really mean to, but it just kind of happened. It didn't really mean for it to be anything. I just released, about 5 episodes just saying like, hey, here are some things I'm noticing, some conversations I'm having. Kind of forgot about it because I was busy. I was working a 60+ hour a week job, So I kind of forget about it. And I go back to iTunes at the time to look for podcasts to listen to, because this was kind of a new thing, right? And there was one called The Accidental Creative that was one of the top podcasts on iTunes. And my first thought was, oh no, I stole someone else's idea. Why didn't I check first to make sure? But it was my podcast that was like one of the top podcasts on iTunes, which is crazy. So there were thousands of people listening to this thing right out of the gate. And I realized I'd kind of stumbled into something that I was really meeting a need, that people really wanted to have these conversations about creating on demand. And so began to really sort of bolster that and build it up, and then started getting invitations to go speak at some incredible companies. So it's funny, I was taking my vacation time. I think for about 3 or 4 years, my family basically just did like weekend getaways. We didn't go on vacation for like 3 or 4 years because I was using all my vacation time to go speak. I would fly across the country to speak at some giant company or some conference or something, fly back overnight, and then like be at an 8 o'clock meeting the next. I mean, it's kind of crazy, the stuff that we were doing. And then realized like, okay, this is kind of where things are going. So left, started my company, was offered a book deal with Penguin Random House, which was, well, it was just Penguin at the time, which was great. That was the first book. The book did well. And so that was, I guess, 12 years ago. And now for the last decade plus, I've been traveling, consulting, writing books. I just published my 5th book with Penguin Random House. And so that's kind of the very long arc of, how I got to doing what I'm doing.
And I think that's super useful. And it's funny, maybe apropos of today. So today is Mike's birthday, actually. And he's not quite there, but he's pushing 40. You're pushing 50 and I'm somewhere right in the middle. And so one of the discussions we were having prior to the show is, this idea that, we were trying to, I guess, sort of estimate when you may have written this first book, and when these sort of things started to come together, because I think there's this culture of, watching Instagram and watching YouTube and watching all this stuff and seeing all these 20-something, success stories, quote unquote success stories, or, whatever it is, these, instant millionaires that are popping up everywhere. And I think for people who get a little bit older, so I just turned 40 last year, I'll be 41 this year. And, I know for people like me, sometimes we're susceptible to seeing that crap and going, oh crap, we sort of screwed this thing up. We did, we're late in life and we blew it. We were supposed to be a millionaire at 26 and it didn't work out. And I think that, growing up, when we grew up as sort of contemporaries, like you mentioned earlier, there was sort of a time before Google. And I think that time before Google allowed us to grow up and live a life without these expectations being set by other people. And so, but now it's really difficult for people growing up, obviously they're seeing all this stuff, they're inundated with it. And then for people like us, we're like, oh my God, we didn't realize that we were supposed to be there, but we're missing it. But based on sort of loose math, it sounds like maybe you were late 30s, almost 40 by the time you published your first book. And that was sort of the...
I was mid 30s. So I'm pretty open. So.
Okay. Yeah, that was sort of the consensus Mike and I had come to, is that it requires a certain amount of filling of buckets, right? You have to have a certain amount of life experience before you can go out and really, provide something of value. Your book worked because it was built on the back of all your personal experience, all these conversations. And if you'd have tried to write that book at 18, it just wouldn't have worked.
No, not at all. And I think that's a really wise observation. And, success comes in layers. This is something I always tell young people, especially. We have this there's this myth of sort of, all of a sudden everything just happened and suddenly you're successful. But the reality is success more often than not. Now, occasionally that happens, but more often than not, it comes in layers. It's that by the time you get to the place where you're like writing and publishing a book, that's just the next thing to do. It doesn't feel like some monumental breakthrough. It's just, I've been working on this for years and years and years and years. And now I'm codifying it into a book, and now it's being published. And that's just the next thing. That's just the next step. It doesn't feel like some monumental breakthrough. And that's true in many careers, and so I think, and if you look at the statistics, it's really interesting. Look at the statistics of funded companies in Silicon Valley. The ones that are often the ones that are the most successful typically are ones that are founded by people who have had one or two or three other companies under their belt. They've failed, they've learned all their hard lessons. And then maybe their third company that they start in their late 30s, typically early 40s, is the one that really takes off because they've seen all the patterns. They've connected all the dots and they realize, oh, okay, there are some pitfalls I have to be careful not to fall into. And so when you're young, everything seems very black and white. Everything seems very clear. Well, this is what we need to do, or you're getting it wrong. And I was that way in my 20s. Like I thought I knew everything in my 20s. It was only with a little bit of maturity that I suddenly realized that things are actually a little more gray than I often give them credit for. And the precision with which we can describe that grayness is what makes us a great creative and a great leader, right? The ability to kind of look into the gray and also to see patterns at the same time and to say, okay, here's what seems to be going on here. I think that's what makes us great creatives and makes us great leaders ultimately. And so I think that's a really astute observation you make that, we should, I always tell young people, like, go pick a company and work there for 10 years. And then you'll know a lot more about yourself. You're going to know a lot more about what you're good at, about the places you add value. And then if you do that, if you just commit to that for a decade, just pouring yourself into some place, adding value wherever you can, at the end of that, you're probably going to have a lot of options because you're going to A, you're going to know yourself better, but B, you're going to prove to people around you that you're the kind of person who sticks around and adds value, which is something that's kind of rare in the world today.
Yeah, I'm actually glad that you brought up that fact that go work somewhere for 10 years and then kind of go from there, because coming from a musical background similar to yours and starting a creativity podcast, I don't know anything about creativity. I'm not a pro in this, but having before you wrote Accidental Creative, you spent 10 years in a creative firm and got your feet wet and then wrote the book. And so it makes me feel better knowing that, like you didn't just jump out from, being in a band to writing an amazing book on creativity. You actually went and did the work and got the background on that first.
Well, and the interesting thing is too, when I think one of the things that people say about the stuff that I've written, and I'm really grateful that they say this because this is probably what means more to me than anything, is that it's very precise. That I'm saying things that don't sound like vague platitudes, but sound like meaningful specifics. And that's because these are things I was beating my head against the wall trying to deal with when I was actually, sort of in the trenches day to day, trying to lead a team, trying to figure out where the next idea is going to come from, trying to, deal with all the personality conflicts and all the great times. And how do we celebrate when something goes well, or do we just move on? Or what do we, these are the specific types of situations. So often people will say to me, do you have a camera on the wall of our office? How is it that you're writing about the stuff, and the reality is no, it's just that, things are way more common than we think they are. These dynamics are way more, we always think we're the only ones dealing with something until somebody begins to point out that pretty much everybody's dealing with some of the same stuff, right? Now, the way it plays out is different, but the underlying governing dynamics are often very similar. So, it's kind of an interesting thing. So I'm really glad you said that. I think with experience comes precision. With maturity comes precision. The ability to be able to see things and call them what they are, rather than just speaking in big platitudes. It's why a lot of times I will read books and I'll just say it just doesn't feel like there's anything here, because it just feels like a rehash of all the things that have already been said. But there's no meaningful specific. And I think the best thing we can do as a creative is be precise. in how we, whatever it is we're doing.
You actually, I was listening to another interview where you were on, and you brought up the fact that when you write, you actually write to someone. Like you pick someone and you're writing to that one person. And that you mentioned that that's actually why a lot of people will come to you and say, hey, is there a camera on the wall? Are you watching me? You know, in reality, you're writing to that one person, and it helps kind of frame your book from start to finish. So
yeah, and I've done that with every book, and I do it with every podcast. I mean, I imagine a specific person sitting across the desk from me when I'm writing, and I write the book to that specific person. And to your point, I think that really makes a difference in terms of, and by the way, that's not just writing books. I mean, that's creating anything. You know, we tend to try to use avatars or customer profiles or things like that, which are these sort of, you know, these kind of where we try to like combine a bunch of people into sort of a demographic or a psychographic. And I mean, that can be useful. I just find it a lot more meaningful and compelling when you think about a specific person and you create for that person. I think your work's going to be a lot more precise that way. And so anybody, I mean, if you're making music, if you're designing, if you're writing, if you're building a business, you know, think about it with that kind of precision. It's going to really help the creative endeavor.
All right, that was our conversation with Todd Henry. He is an amazing author, and I do highly recommend his books, especially Louder Than Words. You should definitely check that one out, and it is on Audible. Moving on, our next category is entertainment. This was really hard to choose from. First and foremost, we had DJ Qbert. If you don't know who he is, do a quick Google search and then watch a couple YouTube videos. And yeah, that will clue you in real quick. We also had Jay Nielsen, one of the judges on Discovery Channel's Forged in Fire. It's a really cool show. It talks about they essentially make knives from scratch and then they test them, and it's a competition style show. And if you're interested in that kind of stuff, definitely check it out. Jay is a highly skilled blacksmith and really knows his stuff. Last but not least, we had DJ Rob Swift. And Rob Swift is a member of the Executioners, a DJ battle group from New York. They worked with artists like Linkin Park. And yeah, so let's just get to it. The winner is Rob Swift. And the reason why is because we talked about the history of hip-hop. And that, to me, is really cool. So check out this clip from this year's entertainment winner, DJ Rob Swift.
Let's talk about that for a little bit. You had the opportunity to grow up in Jackson Heights, Queens in the 70s and 80s, and your father and brother were both DJs. How you essentially witnessed hip hop being born. Can you talk about that and just the early days of hip hop and how your career and your brother's career kind of was a part of that, really?
Yeah, right on. Well, I grew up in Jackson Heights, Queens in the 70s and 80s. New York City was a beacon for art, whether it was the punk scene or the hip hop scene. I feel like New York just gave birth to this renaissance and a new perspective on how to view music and artisticness. And by no means do I want people to think that when you said I witnessed hip hop being born, that I was at the park jams with Kool Herc and Grandmaster Flash. It wasn't in that sense, you know, like I was in Jackson Heights, Queens. The pioneers of this art form, the pillars of everything that I do were up in the Bronx. Yeah. And I was 8, 9 years old when hip hop hit the mainstream, when movies, well, I shouldn't say movies, but for example, the news started to document what these kids were doing in the Bronx. And then fast forward to me being 12 years old, in junior high school, going to the Jackson Theater in my neighborhood to watch the showing of Wild Style, which is the first hip hop movie. So I wouldn't necessarily say that I was there physically at the park jams to witness this amazing culture birth, but my older brother was definitely there. He was going to the park jams. He was getting his hands on the cassette tapes that featured those park jams and DJs like Jazzy J, Grand Wizard Theodore, Grandmaster Flash, Africa Bambaataa, Tony Tone, Charlie Chase, cutting it up while MCs like the Fantastic Five Freaks, the Cold Crush Brothers, the Jazzy Five, Coke LaRock. My brother would sit me down and play me these cassette tapes and explain to me everything that the DJ was doing and why and how he was keeping time for his rappers to get busy, whether it was Flash and the Furious Five or Brown was a Theodore and the Fantastic Five Freaks. I had this, whereas now you could log on to my site, for example, Brolic Army DJ School, and sit down in the comfort of your living room and get lessons on how this art form evolved into what it is. I was with my brother getting schooled in a very organic grassroots way. And in that sense, I was young enough to see the growth of this amazing culture, specifically the art of DJing, till now, 2021. And it's online, and I get to chat with cats like you and vibe the same way I vibed with my brother in my mom's living room on the couch over a cassette tape. Now we could have the same conversations via Zoom, which is amazing. So I have seen the different stages of this art form, and I'm blessed because a lot of people now receive hip hop via YouTube or Instagram. I was going to park jams with my brother when I was old enough and watching these pillars perform. I remember I myself used to breakdance, and battle kids. So I've dabbled in all of the elements of hip hop, b-boying, MCing. I to this day, if you ask me to, I could sit down and write a rhyme for you. I don't necessarily like my voice, so I'd be apprehensive about spitting it, but I could write rhymes. I tried the beatbox. I wrote graffiti. DJing is just what I was best at, and here I am today.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's it's fun listening to your stories of sort of hearing the cassette tapes and things like that your brother brought home. Like I remember and Mike probably has a similar experience as I do, just sort of based on where we live geographically. But when I was a kid in the 90s and like what was going on in New York was happening in New York, and I was living in little Pocatello, Idaho. I was a graffiti artist. And so I was really involved in sort of that hip hop scene as best as I could in Southeast Idaho, get into that scene. So I remember I used to get a bunch of like bootleg VHS tapes and stuff like that, all this stuff of like, the kids out in New York doing graffiti and the break beats and break dancing and all this kind of stuff and the DJ scene and all that. So it's one of the things that I think I appreciate the most of so much of your music is your music captures that era of New York for me. And, as somebody who didn't have the privilege, or I guess it was a privilege, I don't know, of living there, the way that I absorbed or the way that I brought in New York into my life was totally different. And so it's really cool to sort of hear the similarity, like I too did try to make my own mixtapes and tried to do all this kind of stuff, pulling down stuff, record something off the AM radio and dub it to a tape and all that kind of stuff, so it's fun to hear sort of your contemporary stories as somebody who did grow up there.
Right on, man. That's beautiful.
I don't know if you meet so many people, but we've met before. You came out to Salt Lake with Miles Lampshady a few years ago. And you performed, and I was actually in that battle that you judged. Wow. I did a mashup with Missy and Stevie Wonder, and I didn't expect to go to the second round. So my second set was crap. I wasn't ready. I didn't manage my time well enough to get a good solid set in. But that was my first time I'd ever seen you really perform. I never got a chance to see you back in the day with the Executioners or other than YouTube. And, you know, I have followed your career before that, but that was the first live performance of something like that I have seen. And we've had other DJs on our show before, but most of them are club DJs and most of them are radio guys. And there is a huge difference between someone like you and a regular club DJ. And the difference is pretty much you get a show. You get it's your trick DJing, you're sampling, you're looping, you're doing all these different things that your normal nightclub DJ or radio guy isn't necessarily doing all the time. You're a battle DJ for a sense. Can you talk about what influenced you to want to be a battle DJ and go down that road rather than I'm sure that the sampling and the battling you know, has a lot to do with where you grew up. But at the same time, it's kind of it's its own thing. Can you maybe break that down for us a little bit?
I think the short answer to your question revolves around the fact that I am one of those guys that likes to maximize their potential. So what I mean by that is if you asked me right now to vacuum your carpet, I'm going to make sure that I get every speck, every piece of lint, every hair, every corner of that carpet. And I use that as an analogy to say, with regards to DJing, when I first learned how to perform my first scratch, for example, my brother put me on my dad's turntables and he taught me how to move the record back and forth and coax sound. But for me, when I heard other people coax sound, but better than my brother, I then wanted to figure out what those DJs were doing. So my first example of what a hip hop DJ does was watching my brother on my dad's equipment in our living room, cut up 2 copies of Walk This Way by Aerosmith, nice. Right? But I was also fortunate enough to live here in New York City where you had access to radio shows like Red Alerts, Friday Night Show, Chuck Chill Out Saturday Night Show on 98.7 KISS. Then when you move the dial over towards the right and arrived at WBLS on Friday nights and Saturday nights, you had Mr. Magic and Marley Marl. And these guys were better than my brother, more refined. They had a wider record collection. What they were doing to the records was just a notch higher than what my brother was capable of. So now I wanted to learn what these 3 DJs were doing. So my point is, just the kind of person that I am, I always want to maximize my potential and learn as much as I can about a specific thing as possible. I'm just very geeky in that way. I like to know what I'm doing, the inside and out of it, the left and the right of it, the up and the down of it, every facet of whether it's DJing or art or editing. I've been getting into editing within the last few years, and I just like to maximize my potential. So I think because of that, I never stop learning. And to this day, I get inspired to teach myself new scratches, new ways of beat juggling. Although people out there might see me as this quote unquote master DJ or someone that's accomplished, I still consider myself a student. So because of that, I just wanted to learn how to manipulate the turntable as much as I possibly could. And when it comes to battling, that's what it's all about, is technique and skill. You know, you can't just let a record play and do a blend, you know, from one song to the next in a competition. You have to really alter the music that you're playing for people as much as you can so that you could stand out and possibly win said battle that you're in. So I think my nature as a person wanting to maximize my potential made it so that it was just the natural path for me. And thankfully, I made that decision to really level up with regards to my skills, because I was able to forge a career for myself and etch my name amongst other great DJs. And I mean, the reason why we're here talking is because of what I've accomplished in my earlier years and how that's propelled me to today. So battling for me was just another way of maximizing my potential, receiving inspiration from other DJs that were just as good as me. And now I'm on the same stage with them and I need to prove myself and stand out. All that just makes you push yourself. So
yeah, no, I think that's awesome. And thanks so much for that background. I wonder if you would sort of then talk about kind of the next steps, right? So how you applied this stuff. So, I mean, obviously you started learning at a young age, you started working on it. And because of this sort of, I guess, ingrained drive in you to keep achieving and keep doing better and more, how did that start to manifest into gigs and performances and ultimately into a career?
Yeah, it all happened very organically. And it was about me putting one foot ahead of the other and not thinking too far into the future. So when I first started DJing, I just wanted people in my neighborhood to know I DJ'd. And that was my way of developing my personality and my image. You know, on my block, for example, there was this kid named Carlos, and he was like the cute dude on the block that all the girls wanted to date. Then you might have had another friend of mine, Evaristo. He was just super athletic, right? And everyone knew if you were playing baseball in the parking lot or playing freeze tag, you wanted Evaristo on your team because he was always the fastest guy, the most agile guy. My brother was the bully of the block. So everyone was scared of my brother. You know, everyone had an identity. I wanted an identity. And DJing for me was a pathway to create myself. So that was the first step, creating myself, developing as a person via this music, because I wasn't necessarily the best breakdancer. I was a toy graffiti artist and I hated my voice as a rapper. You know, I tried all these different things. I played sports, but I wasn't necessarily the standout kid on the block with regards to these different, whether it was athletics or creativity or just being a cute kid, right? But DJing was something that was unique to me that no one on my block could do as well as me. Or at all, really. The only DJs in my neighborhood where I grew up in Jackson Heights, Queens, was myself and my brother. The other DJs came from the neighboring neighborhood of Corona, Queens, where the Mets played. Back then, it was Shea Stadium. So we stood out, my brother and I, as the DJs of our neighborhood. And I, within months, ended up being better than my brother. So I saw how, because of that, people started to attach me with an image and a persona, so to speak. You know what I mean? And I just kept going with that. I wanted to grow that persona. So now it's not enough for people in my block to know who I was as a DJ. Now I want people at my junior high school to know. So I remember at my junior high school, they threw a dance. And I asked the principal to let me DJ the dance, and he did. He paid me like $50. My brother and my dad helped me lug all of the equipment we had in the house to the gymnasium at our junior high school. And now kids at my junior high school knew I was a DJ. And then I graduated from junior high school, went to high school. Now people are asking me to DJ their parties. So gradually, little by little, one step at a time, I built a reputation, a persona, so to speak. And from there, it was like, all right, people in Corona, Queens, in Jackson Heights, Queens, in Woodside, Queens know who I am. I want the city to know who I am. So I started entering organized battles like the DMC. And now people from Brooklyn and the Bronx and Staten Island are going to one central space, a club at the Palladium in New York City, a small little intimate club in Brooklyn. And I'm competing against other people, and gradually, just one step at a time, you're doing things to propel your name, to push yourself. And to this day, I'm still doing it. Now I'm just doing it on a wider level, on a bigger platform like social media, Instagram. But it's about always putting one step ahead of the other and doing what you can to get your name, who you are, what you're about out there for people to see and embrace.
Yeah. Can you talk about the early years with the X-Men, how you guys kind of came together, how the group formed, and how important the crew is? Before the X-Men, there was a group called the Supermen, who I think you kind of looked up to. And then you got like the Scratch Pickles, the Beach Junkies, all those guys like that. They've formed these crews. And how important is that to progressing as an artist? Having someone else like that you consistently practice with, and kind of hold you accountable. That sounds to me like I used to do promoting back in Phoenix. I haven't been a DJ like with turntables for more than like 10 years. Before that, I did promotions, and I worked with bands. And working with a band, you had 7 people all working kind of towards the same goal and trying to progress as a group. And I could see a crew, like a DJ crew, having the same kind of mentality and having the same kind of leverage that comes with having 7 different people working on something like that. And I see that as something that's could be very valuable.
Well, DJing is a communal art form.
See, I didn't see that early on in my career.
It really is.
It really is. The community that comes with hip hop is something that's new to me. I didn't know about like the Herc in Salt Lake and B-boy community and the actual scene that comes with hip hop. And I love it. Like, to me, it's everything amazing that I've been looking for. And
it's amazing.
The early part of my DJ, it's just me. And I'm looking at other DJs, and I didn't have anyone that I could really bounce off of and work with. And if I had found a place like the Herc when I was a kid, I would have been in heaven. Like, that would have been my, and I found it when I was 35, after 10 years is working as a DJ. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Interesting. No, it's, I hear you, bro. Like, I'm with you, you know what I mean? And, the interesting thing about what you're talking about with regards to crews is a lot of people don't realize that hip hop is the extension of gangs. Like, the people that are responsible for this culture, the pillars of this art form, a lot of them, before they became world-renowned DJs and MCs and breakdancers, were in gangs. And being in a gang is a form of camaraderie that you don't experience by yourself. You are with your boys, you run together, and you fight other gangs, other rivals, other kids from other neighborhoods. There came a point where the pioneers of this art form realized that violence wasn't the way to express their energy, that they could respect each other's differences and showcase their differences in a more creative way without being violent. And hence the battles between crews like Cold Crush Brothers and Fantastic Five Freaks. DJs like Kool Herc and Africa Bambaataa. That was their form of expressing that, all right, we're different. I respect that we're different, but I'm better than you. And doing the whole macho, chauvinistic, for lack of a better word, who has a bigger dick kind of thing, but in a way that's healthy and expressive and not violent. Yeah. You know, so hip hop evolved from gang culture.
Well, didn't BAM, like Zulu Nation, didn't it kind of start from the Black Spades?
Exactly. So when you reference crews like the Superman DJs, Clark Kent, DJ Scratch, Richie Rich, Tone Be Nimble, Plastic Man, Aladdin, these were the equivalent of what a gang would have been in the 70s, but instead of going around and beating people up, they're beating people creatively on the turntables. And the interesting thing about the X-Men was the X-Men was inspired by the Superman in that, you know, guys can relate to this. You're in high school, it's the beginning of the year, and there's a new guy that like moved into the neighborhood and now is going to your high school. And that new guy makes the decision, you know what? I want to be the popular kid. I'm not going to be marginalized here at the school. I'm going to beat up all of the tough guys at the school to make a name for myself. That's how the X-Men was birthed. The X-Men came together, Steve D, Sean C, Rock Raider, Johnny Cash, came together to battle the Supermen, who were the most feared DJs at the time. So again, that mentality, that gang mentality is now being expressed creatively through music. And you have one crew's skills being pit against another crew's skills. And the crew that triumphs ends up being the kings of that city, if you will. So the X-Men were like, yo, man, we're going to call ourselves the X-Men, a different comic book characters, in order to make a statement that we want to go against the Supermen and battle them and let the world know, especially New York City, that those aren't the only DJs that can kill shit. And that's how all of these different crews started, man. That urge, that want to be known and be accepted and be respected. And all of that grew from gang mentality. So it's interesting. Now you have crews that might think, well, being in a crew is about everyone like being popular, but that's not necessarily the only aspect of being in a crew. A lot of times when you're in a crew, you help each other grow as DJs, because, for example, being in the X-Men, I knew that these guys were just as good as I was, and each day they were striving to get better. So that pushed me to practice as hard as I did and not settle and be complacent. So amongst, you know, the idea of being with other guys that are like-minded and are DJs and you could enter competitions together, a lot of it is just a motivating factor. Like, one guy is dope, now I want to be as dope as him, and you guys influence each other to practice.
And that was the legendary DJ Rob Swift from the Executioners. You should definitely go check out his website, Brawlek Army DJ School, I think is what it is. Just Google that. His website will come up. Or just Google his name and a bunch of stuff will come up. Anyways, our next category is business leadership / CEO / all that jazz. And honestly, I don't want to go and look everyone up and make a list. The winner is Taco Scott Porter. So this year's CEO / business leader is Scott Porter.
Eclectic is a great way to describe it. So when I look at your, sort of history, and I've heard it told a couple different ways, but when we talk about the sorts of businesses and the sorts of industries and the things that you've been involved with over the course of your career, I mean, to say that they are totally disparate is like an understatement. And so, I think, you've probably united these things all under sort of brand experience because it sort of is applicable to everything. But I wonder if you just sort of talk about this, really interesting or really eclectic, a chain of events that took you to sort of modern day.
Well, I almost feel like you just take a dartboard and just throw at it. And
That's kind of what it seems like, right? Yeah, I know. Well, I guess really kind of zooming out from, and to give a little bit of a context and kind of a current that has flowed, and really driven the career decisions that I've made. I've always felt like I've wanted to be involved in something that makes a difference in people's lives and makes the world a better place in some way. And over the course of time, and as things have developed for me, I've understood and I've gotten a lot more clarity, personal clarity, and a lot more intention and inspiration on what that actually looks like for me. And I'll get into that, but really that has been the driving force. I wanted to be a force for good in the world. And so how that's taken shape and how I've embraced the opportunities that I've either created or that have come to me, then that's been it has been a very, it's been a North Star for me that has guided the choices that I've made. So, after undergrad, I also did my undergrad at BYU. I was interested in, I graduated in public relations, and I actually took a job working for Owen Media for Paul Owen in Seattle. I was the first employee. He was breaking off on his own. And I remember my first day on the job, it was like, we're building this agency together, and literally you're building your desk on the first day on the job. So it was my IKEA desk. I still remember it was that kind of purpley blue IKEA desk. And I built it and then set up my computer, and we're like off to the races. And so that was, so I helped build that agency, worked with Paul, and then ended up going back to business school after several years, and really used business school to explore and to foster and to nourish this idea of entrepreneurship and what I should do. Most of the track at BYU was all focused on a corporate development, on some sort of corporate job that, you get in this level, and then eventually you work your way up and up and up and into this corporate ladder. And that just was of no interest to me. For me, it kind of kills my soul. I mean, not everyone's the same. And so hats off to people that love that life. And I have so many friends and very amazing colleagues that I respect. It is just not for me. And so I learned that early on. And so I knew I needed to embrace different. I knew I needed to embrace a different path. So I did an internship in business school. I got my own internship working for a nonprofit in Guatemala over the summer, trying to help them build their ecotourism project. I did marketing research for them, and it was amazing. When business school was ending, a friend said, "Hey, are you going to this info session for this nursing home company?" And I'm like, I literally remember started laughing. I was like, "Wait, you're going to an info session for a nursing home company?" I'm like, "Okay, well, is there going to be pizza?" And so I went and was completely surprised by the entrepreneurial nature and the business rigor of this organization. And it was what really, and ultimately, I decided to join the Ensign Group and was really attracted to and enthralled by this idea of, they basically out of the gates, it's like they train you to be an administrator in a nursing home, and they give you the keys, and this is you're in charge of all the P&L and all of the decisions, and you're essentially, it's your business. and they will help you be successful. But their business model was to turn distressed properties into successful, reputable businesses that are making a difference in people's lives. And I loved it. It was something totally unexpected, out of left field. Never in a million years thought I would work for a nursing home, let alone really enjoy it. When it was good, it was great. And when it was tough, it was really harrowing. And I had some amazing experiences with phenomenal leaders and growth and experiences that actually shaped the entire rest of my career and my life. That is where, because I remember the first facility that I took over with our team, it was a bankrupt facility in the Pasadena area, small building, and it was half occupied. And like no one knew about us. We had about 200 direct competitors within a 10-mile radius. And so we needed to do something to get the word out. And we didn't have any money to invest in like any robust marketing efforts. And so I started to think and study, and we'll get to what this then became the common thread among all my apparently disparate career experiences.
Tacos.
Well, tacos are always there. But it was actually, there is some interesting ties to tacos, because I found myself training with my team on like, hey, I just had this taco experience. What can we learn from this that applies to a nursing home? And I continued to use these like really simple interactions that I had that were all based around, more importantly than the amazing, insane taco that it was more about the human connection and how these taqueros and how these taquerias and how the person making the tacos, as well as the actual taco entire place and everything, the way that they're set up, how do they actually create these raving fans? How do they create word of mouth? What are they doing to connect with us on a human level? And so there's all sorts of like micro things that happen in an amazing taco experience. And I found myself sharing those as, you know, these are best practices. These are ways that we can, these are elements of amazing experience design that we can embrace in the nursing home business to really truly connect with people. Remembering names, looking people in the eye, smiling, remembering something about them so they come back and you feel like a VIP. Anticipating their needs, like getting that little canister of toothpicks right there, because they know you're going to get cilantro stuck in your teeth, you know? So like, how do you like that is a principle that could apply to a billion-dollar software business. That's a principle that could apply to a churro business, to a nursing home, to whatever. How do we anticipate people's needs and help them get their job to be done? And so anyway, so as I started working in the nursing home, I started sharing these experiences. And I also realized that if we don't have money to dedicate to like a marketing budget of any sort, what can we do to get the word out? And I started to study what other titans had done, you know, like Disney, Starbucks, Zappos, Chick-fil-A, Nordstrom, Trader Joe's, all of these companies have done to create an experience that you and I end up talking about at our dinner tables, you know, voluntarily, or we're like, oh my gosh, you're never going to believe what just happened to me at Trader Joe's or whatever. And so I started to study what they did and pull all of these elements from the amazing practices that these companies have done to create an experience that changes people, that really truly connects with people in a meaningful level so that they are then talking about you. And that is the strongest and most effective form of referral. That's the strongest, most effective form of marketing, is that personal recommendation. And so that's what we did. I created a system and a framework, kind of a playbook for implementing both an amazing culture, as well as an amazing culture internally that then leads to your team creating an extraordinary, what I like to call a breakthrough brand experience that gets wild results. And so we did that. We did it at the first nursing home. And I thought, I'm going to try this system. And within a year, we went from bankruptcy to 4.5 million in revenue. We were 90% occupied. We were, the facility of choice for people. We were able to recruit and retain top talent. This did not happen overnight. It took us about a year to get to that point, but it was all sorts of little things like offering everyone a fresh bottle of water when they came into the facility, calling people by name, greeting people in the hallways, having the doctor's favorite chocolate bar there when they came to visit, making sure our floors shined. Like it was almost like a mirror. It was beautiful, like all these little things that made a difference. We would train our janitors and CNAs we would take them to lunch at the Ritz-Carlton in Pasadena and then dissect our experience and then look at applying what we were experiencing as a customer there into our nursing home. And so there were lots of different things. And ultimately, we even got some doctors to send their parents to us as patients, as residents with us, which that will only happen if they truly trust you and trust the care. And so all of this together was, I thought, oh gosh, this is like, this system works. I need to do this again. So I went to another nursing home. We did it there successfully. It was a totally different scenario, 3 times as large, regulatory crisis, but we're able to get out of that and get back on track. Harrowing experience, but we did it. And then I applied that when I ran a home health agency in Orange County, and as well as when we launched the first all you can fly airline called all you can fly membership airline called Surf Air. And we launched that in Los Angeles as well. Totally different industry, but I was like, hey, you guys, I know exactly what we need to do to create an amazing experience that will skyrocket. Like the NPS, the Net Promoter Score for airlines at the time was 15 out of 100. And so abysmal. Like if you talk about industries that have horrible customer satisfaction, like those are the industries that I have chosen to be a part of.
Well, you couldn't pick a worse one than airlines. As far as customer service goes, like that's kind of, let's pick the hardest one and go for that.
Totally. Well, nursing homes are probably right up there next to it too. It's, and my father's in a nursing home now. And so I actually know from the other end, the experience that you can have. And so it's definitely nedeed.
Yeah, we just put my grandma in a nursing home as well. So I've been right down this path the last month. So it's definitely a hard process.
And it's funny, so we mentioned earlier that it seems so disparate, your career path, right? These different things that you're doing. And you used the word earlier, you said this, this apparently different. But when you really look at the things that make a great VIP airline experience, where you're dealing with high rollers and the people who can afford a membership airline experience, and then you're also looking at the people who are working in nursing homes, the TLC or the little things are the whole difference. Like, if you can think of the worst hotel you've stayed at or the best hotel, the differences are those little things, right? There's a little placard with your name on your pillow, or there's something fresh that you can have, a drink in the room or something. And, but it's not, I think that for a lot of people, they think in order to have a brand experience that's great and meaningful, that you must come with something grandiose, that it has to be this big, amazing, Times Square experience or something. When in reality, just like, if you remember my name, I'll be much more likely to come back.
Totally. There's actually statistics about that. It's like 71% of us are more likely to purchase when people remember our name, or they remember what we ordered before, or they genuinely give us a recommendation based on what they know about us. Yeah. That's crazy. That makes sense, right? And not only that, but like there's another report that customers will spend 140% more when they have a positive customer experience. So, whatever industry you're in, plug your numbers in there. Do you want to add 140% to those numbers? And so you tell me how important you think that would be to focus on creating an extraordinary brand experience and customer experience that connects in a meaningful way with people. and it's something that's not just like, it's something that I think a lot of people think that it has to be like you said, grandiose, or something that's very expensive, or something that you need to devote a lot of energy and really specific like design around. Sure, you can do that, absolutely. But what I have seen be the most successful in the companies that I've run and in the companies that I've consulted with is that they establish an amazing internal culture where they truly understand, every one of their team members understand, or they are and they are very committed to and engaged in their mission and values. And so if they have this strong, solid foundation of, if everyone on the team understands your mission, values, what is expected of them, and what type of experience they're looking to create, then you are enabling all of your team members to wow people and surprise and delight at every moment. And oftentimes they are such little things that don't cost anything. Let me give you an example. Just two quick examples. So I run a gourmet churro business. So after the airline, natural like transition into gourmet churros,
next,
right? Yeah, obvious. And so our mission is to create the best food experience in the world, and we want to help people experience the joy of food. We call it deep fried happiness, and we want to just like give people, our vehicle for spreading joy and happiness is these fresh filled churros, right? And so we do catering at parties and weddings and things. And one of our team members, we got some feedback from a catering event that they did. And she said, "Hi, San Diego, I'm so happy. The churros were amazing. Thank you so much. The event was awesome for my son's 13th birthday. And what was especially amazing is when Colin named one of the churros after my son in honor of his birthday. He called it this is the flavor mix that was Ryland's Delight." And so we've never told our team like, hey, whenever you're going to a special event for someone, name a churro after them, or create some creative flavor combo that would be awesome for those kids. And they were so excited about the fact that he had created this on the spot. And so I mean, tribute to, and we call them halos, but shout out and kudos to Colin for really bringing our mission and values to life in that moment. And one other quick example, we had, this was an email exchange. So this wasn't even in person. So the human connection can happen whether you're in chat, whether you're in text, whether, human connect, or whether you're face-to-face or whatever. So our events manager was following up with the wedding, and she said, "Hey, how's it going? Just want to check in. Are you still wanting the churros at your reception?" And she said, "No, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to cancel my wedding. I'm no longer getting married, period." Response. So, I mean, think about how you would respond as an event manager. Would you respond?
Upsell them.
Okay. Or yeah, would you respond at all? Sometimes it's like, oh, the lead was lost. Yeah. So then we're done. But my events manager, Camille, she wrote back, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was like, "Oh, no problem at all. I'm so sorry to hear about your broken engagement. I also had a broken engagement, and I know it's not all roses. If you're ever in the area where our food truck is, or if you want to come and find us, please come and get, 6 free churros. We do them in a 6-pack, 6 free churros, complimentary, and I hope things continue to go well for you." And she wrote back just one line. She's like, "I will be a fan of San Diego churros for life." And it still gives me chills to like recount that experience, because I love that Camille cared about the human and cared about the other person on the other side of the line and connecting with them. Even though this was never face-to-face, they may not even recognize each other if they ran into each other at the grocery store. but they connected and she felt that we cared. And that is what this is all about to me, is that we need to create businesses that care more. If I know you're in Idaho, but there's a lot of billboards here, Ken Garff billboards, that all I know about Ken Garff is that they listen to me. I'm not in the market for a car very much, but all their billboards are, their key differentiator is that they hear you. And what is the thing that you hate about shopping for cars is that you're going to get it's this super sales push pitch. And instead they want to communicate that they hear you, that they're willing to listen. And that to me makes it enticing for me to go in there, even though I'm not in the market for a car, but I know that that is something that's so important to them. That's part of their mission and values, because that's what they that's what they're communicating. And that's what they want, that message they want to have come across.
Yeah. So interesting thing. So I used to work on Ken Garff campaigns actually, and we started the whole We Hear You thing. And at the point they moved that business to a different agency, and I had left the agency, so I'm not working on it anymore. But at the time, we were getting something like 98% unaided awareness from people who would learn about that campaign or whatever. Everybody knew exactly what you knew, right? Everybody just said exactly what you said, and they knew it without even having to say Ken Garff. They knew what it was. Yeah, and so that campaign worked extraordinarily well, and I think it illustrates the point you're trying to make about the it's that human connection. And I had a thought, just pop into my head while we were talking about this, how the things that are these little things, these little points of human connection, how valuable they can be versus anybody with money can get your name on the Jumbotron, right? Just going out and spending a bunch of cash and getting your name across the Goodyear blimp or whatever, it's cool. And maybe it makes for a great Instagram moment or whatever. But, if, just in the context of like NBA or something, if, one of the players or the owner of the Jazz, for example, here in Salt Lake, wrote you a nice little handwritten letter thanking you for being a fan or something, that would be every bit as valuable or more so than this thing. Like the loyalty you would have to the company, it's not this frivolous thing that you paid $500 and got my name on the Jumbotron. Rather, this person who is extremely important and took some time out of their day to actually recognize me as an individual. Like, I will buy my season tickets going forward then. It's pretty interesting how just throwing money at the problem doesn't necessarily solve anything.
For sure. And not only that, but if there is a problem, if they already know and you've built enough credit in that trust account with that person, whether they're your customer, your client, whoever, if there is a problem, they're like, oh, you know what? I know that they didn't mean to have that happen. And so I'm going to cut them some slack. Or they're even more willing, like we do. There's like some service recovery statistics as well. Like people are I think it's 4 or 5 times as likely to switch from a 1 to a 5-star on a review if they get a response and they feel like the response is actually like caring and not some canned response, but where they feel like they actually, those churros were really poorly made, they were overdone, whatever it was. I'm so sorry. That was our mistake, like falling on your sword. And people are that much more likely to switch their review from like a 1-star to a 5-star because they feel like you care. They feel like you're actually listening to them and not just like an object or something that's getting in the way of doing their job.
Yeah, I've actually gone through Google reviews in the past, just trying to find someone who, I need someone to do HVAC or whatever. As you're going through, like if you actually notice that the owner or someone at the company is replying to bad reviews, it helps even me as someone who's never worked with the company before, the fact that they actually reply and they leave a good positive, like, hey, we're sorry that happened. How can we help? Yada, yada, yada. That makes all the difference. And in other people coming and reading the reviews, even if they didn't switch it back to 5, the fact that they acknowledged it and took responsibility, that makes all the difference.
Yeah. Well, then
it adds that trust thing.
Exactly. And exactly what you said, you're all of a sudden, those owners and those companies are building a trust account with you, even though you are not yet a customer. But, and even though they're just being real, because we all acknowledge that all of us make mistakes. And so as long as we can see that someone else is being real, we'll cut them some slack, and we're like, okay, yeah, maybe that review is being unreasonable, or maybe they did really do something wrong and they messed up, which we all do. And so you're like, okay, I'll give them a chance, you know?
All right, that was Scott Porter. He is known for his churros and tasting tacos. So go back and listen to the whole episode, and you'll understand why. He is a taco connoisseur and knows the best taco in pretty much the world, or wherever you go, really. He gave us his recommendations for LA and for when you're in Mexico City. So go back and listen, and you'll figure that out. So last but not least, we saved a category for the best show of the year, and it's always really hard to pick this winner. But after we talked about it for a little bit, we went with Chris Leonard. And for those of you who haven't listened to the episode, Chris Leonard is an audio engineer that he does really big events. He's worked with really big artists, and he also does audio for the inauguration. And so it was a really in-depth and technical conversation about audio equipment, and I'm kind of a nerd about that, so that's why it got my vote. And then we talked about doing audio for a Super Bowl party, like I think it was the Philadelphia Eagles. I don't know. It might have been the Eagles. I can't remember what Super Bowl it was that he did the audio for, but it was 1 million plus people, and he had to plan it in less than a week. So it was a really big undertaking, really big project, and we talked about how he pulled it off. So with that in mind, here is our best interview of the year, Mr. Chris Leonard.
Did you have any like bar gigs or anything before you went from, working with your dad to doing in-ear monitors for, artists like Josh Groban?
Yeah. So, I mean, the high school stuff was your typical, my buddy's band was small stuff, and then I went to school for sound. High school didn't go so well for me. And so, I technically a dropout of high school. I was going to be probably 21 if I continued to stay in high school before I graduated. And so, I got out of school and I was like, what am I going to do with my life? I want to do this sound thing, but I wasn't really aware of what the industry held. Like, my dad always dreamed about like, go on the road and doing this thing, but I didn't really pay attention to what that was. So I was like, okay, well, maybe I got to go to school for this. And so I went to recording school, just like a year program, at night school type of thing. But that led me to get my first gig at Maryland Sound.
Okay.
So Maryland Sound is, one of the largest. Actually, at one point they were the largest company in the country, or probably world. And then they've kind of diminished off their rock and roll. That was back in like the 80s that they were kind of the heyday. But certainly one of the bigger companies in the area. They're still around. They've been around since late 60s. So, I spent my first couple months there just what we call sweep land, which is basically you're sweeping the speakers, making sure they all work. You're cleaning cable, you're humping gear, that type of thing. And slowly progressed my way up into doing. So it wasn't like out of high school, all of a sudden I'm out mixing for Tears for Fears and Josh Groban.
So you've always been in the live arena. You never did any studio recording or anything other than that little bit you did in high school with your friends.
Yeah, the studio thing never really intrigued me. Listen to the same song 100 times for the chorus, punching in like that just didn't, I went to recording school because I wanted kind of the fundamentals. I mean, EQ is still EQ, compression is still compression, so a lot of those things still translate. But and they had a live portion to the class, so it was definitely it was my way to get towards doing live sound full time.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And it's so funny when you think about, I mean, just how far you've come too, from the guy that was humping gear to this. You know, we've talked to a couple other like high profile sound engineers on this show before. And that seems to be the story, right? Is I guess, doing your time, sort of serving, you know, for the sound company and just humping that gear and soldering wires and doing all that kind of good stuff before you actually get to touch anything.
Right.
So I think that's an interesting story. So can you talk about sort of maybe your first big gig, like, you know, maybe a moment that you came to that was sort of a high pressure moment where this is the put up or shut up kind of moment?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I had done a couple of tours, just as, you know, we'd call like the stage jammer, or, you know, the guy who patches things on stage. So I had gone on a couple of those, and, you know, it was fall time or whatever. And we were setting up for a tour that was about to go out, and I was delivering the gear to a small like symphony hall. And it was for this guy, Savian Glover. He's a tap dancer. And the monitor engineer was just going to be a system guy from MSI at the time. And when I show up, the guy was like, "Oh, are you a monitor engineer?" And I was, you know, I had a quick split-second decision to make there of like, you know, how do I answer this? And now I had never done monitors on tour, but I have been doing monitors some with MSI, and I was like, yes. Like, all right, cool. Well, help me set this up, help me dial this in or whatever. And I dialed it in and get things together. And he's like, well, you know, do you just want to do the tour? You know, and I'm like, sure, you know, yes. He was like, just got to check with Bob, but, you know, Bob being the owner of MSI. So I called up Bob, and Bob's like, well, don't F it up. So it was a little bit of fake it till you make it, but not too much. I mean, it's good old analog console, Midas XL3, which is like an old school monitor desk. And it was not an easy gig. I mean, so we said tap dancer, but he had, we carried this deck that was like 8 foot by, I don't know, like 24, that we put Barksberry pickups all the way around the deck for him to tap on. And then it was called Classical Savion. So we had like a small orchestra behind him that was all open air mics. And then we had a jazz band that would play with him. And so all these open air mics, he had 7 wedges all around him. He wanted his taps blaring. So that mixed with the live orchestra and stuff, it was honestly one of the hardest monitor gigs I've ever had, but I was able to survive. And it afforded me the opportunity to, you know, say, hey, I can do monitors on tour now, and was able to progress from there.
That's pretty neat. Chris and Pooch, who we've had on this show before, they're front of house engineers. And there's a big difference between a front of house and a monitor engineer. Our listeners don't really, you know, we're kind of a creativity podcast. We don't really focus on audio. We kind of just go over careers and in the industry type thing. I don't think they know the difference between what you would do for a monitor mix versus a front of house mix. Can you break that down for them? And then also talk about the difficulties of doing monitors over front of house, because there's different things you have to pay attention to.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so monitors would be, you know, front of house would be the guy who's out front mixing for the audience. That's what, you know, most of the audience hears is what the guy's mixing or girl. Monitors is typically a person who's side stage, typically stage left, but it could be stage right, which is, again, I guess the audience may or not know that. But anyway, if you're standing on stage, if you're standing on stage facing the audience, stage left is to your left, and then stage right be to your right. But you know, the artists all have to hear, and that can mean various things for different people. And for some, it's these floor speakers that are on the stage so they can hear, and maybe one per person on stage, sometimes multiple per people, or these things called in-ear monitors, or IEMs, which are what they sound like, you know, instead of big cans, or literally, you've probably seen them if you've watched any Grammys or any other show, these molds that are in their ears, and somebody has to mix for all those. So typically the front of house engineer is only doing one mix, maybe an auxiliary thing, but for the most part, he's doing one mix. A monitor guy or girl, I mean, we're doing sometimes 6, 8, 10, 24, 30 some mixes all at the same time. When you're going festival style, you have 10 different people yelling at you all at the same time for what they want, and you gotta, you know, wrangle that.
It's not just, you know, like, it's not like you're hitting one knob per person. Each person wants, like, okay, I want more of the bass. I want more of this. I want more of that. And each person has their own specific kind of mix that you have to do for them. And so it's kind of like, you know, you're taming 30 different beasts while the front of house guy is taming one. and it just completely different scenario versus a normal mix down that most audio engineers would have to do.
Yeah, it's a different thing. There's a lot of people who there's a whole joke of like friends don't let friends mix monitors, right? There's this whole like where I mean, look, it's it is a tough end of the snake to handle. You're dealing with directly with these artists and these personalities, whereas a front of house, who cares if the drunk guy's yelling at you to hear the guitar solo more? You maybe got to please a girlfriend or a tour manager, but that's pretty easy. On stage, that artist doesn't like you, you're not coming back the next night, or potentially mid gig. There's a lot of psychology that goes into doing monitors, and that's actually one of the things I really liked. Was I liked getting into people's headspace and knowing what it is that they want. I just told this the other day. When I was out with Tears for Fears, Roland, the main singer, he would come out each day to sound check. He'd come up to his microphone and he would sing Kathy's song by Paul Simon. I Hear the Drizzle of the Rain, right? And it was a moment where I'd listen to him, watch his body language, and I could tell when he sang those few lines where he was at that day. And so it's that getting in that mindset of knowing, anticipating what somebody wants without them asking.
So with the current technology and being able to do digital playbacks, can you get pretty close with the digital playback for monitors and then kind of make fine tunes once the artist is there, or does it work differently? I'm not a touring guy. I've never really done monitor mixes. My background's as a DJ. I went to school for recording arts so I could learn how to manipulate audio. And now I'm really getting focused into live sound because it seems like it'd be just a really fun thing to do, get out of the DJ world and just kind of work with bands. Can you use virtual playback to work with your monitors and get them close, or is it?
Yeah, absolutely you can. I mean, the time when I was out there, mind you, for those who don't know, I haven't toured in 10 years. I've been doing the corporate audio thing. We can get to that. But so right when I left was kind of the cusp of when we call it virtual playback, was kind of coming into the scene. And for those who don't know, basically you can multi-track record every input that's on stage. And when the band's not back there, you can play it back. So you can basically, it's a way we can actually practice without the band being there. So yeah, you can absolutely do it with monitors. There's certain things that are difficult, right? So, I mean, we don't just hear right where our ears are. We feel things. It's different depending on where you're standing on the stage at the time. Someone's all the way on stage right, yet there's this massive guitar stack on stage left. That's going to be a completely different experience than the person who's standing all the way on stage left right in front of the guitar stack. So some of those things in virtual playback aren't going to fully translate. But most tours these days, people are on in-ears and the stage volume is minimal as possible. And so when you have like no real amps are on stage, the only really acoustic sound on stage is just the drums themselves. When you have a scenario like that, virtual sound check is basically the exact same thing. Nice. Minus the physical PA, the speakers in the room. That's the other big difference is, the speakers in the room are going to make a difference too. So, but if a front of house guy can play along at the same time, then yeah, it's about as close as you're going to get without the band being there.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool. Well, and I think that people just don't, when you go see your favorite band perform or whatever, I don't think you appreciate just all these things that go on. So I think it's interesting to talk a little bit about that kind of behind the scenes stuff. Do you mind then, let's talk a little bit about that transition out of, doing live music or these types of performances to, this more commercial route. What brought that about and what was the opportunity that you pursued to move into that space?
Yeah, so like many people who are touring, met my wife while on the road. Eventually had a baby, and the road life is not easy. It became a tough decision of wanting to be home more for my family. And so for those who don't know, when you're touring, the average decent tours, you're looking at 3, 4, 5 months sometimes at a time before you're home. Some of the tours I did the longest I was out was probably 3-4 months. There's other people who go out longer than that. Some of these artists, when they go out on tour, they're doing a year and a half, 2-year tours. Now there's going to be some breaks in there, but you're gone a lot. And that can be tough on the family life. So it was a tough choice to make, leaving behind what I had started to create. I wasn't in the touring industry too long, and by some people's, tenure. I was only there for about 7 years. That's not that long, relatively. But I was able to accomplish a lot in a short amount of time, and it wasn't a career move; it was a life move. Is what I kind of tell people. It wasn't like, hey, I'm going this way, and because of career, I've now been able to make a career for myself within the corporate world, but that wasn't the goal as a career move.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's important to point out too, because I think there are a lot of people, I mean, sure, there are guys who can be sort of lifelong sound guys, but you're right that this, life on the road is challenging. It's a difficult life. I mean, we glamorize it in the sort of the media, or, when you hear people talking about it, it sounds sort of glamorous, but maybe it is for the guy that's, taking the, private jet from place to place, but for everybody else that's, straggling along and loading gear and sound checking and doing all this stuff. I mean, it's pretty tough work. And not to mention, as you said, when you sort of have a family back home or whatever, it can be a real challenge. So I think that's great. But I think, with the commercial work, it seems that there's a little more tenure for these guys. So, you had the opportunity to get out on the road, but now you really can build a career around the stuff that you like doing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of people, there's kind of, you can be a freelancer in the corporate audio space, or there's video and lighting as well. Or you can be, a lot of people are full timers at some major companies. So there's 401k, there's health benefits, there's, job security, there's all those things that come along with from the corporate world that are nice to have for some people, and still working on some of the same gear. There's some people who work in the corporate world who are still doing, you do these large general sessions where, Don Henley's coming to play at your general session. You could still be doing corporate work and working at these A-level touring artists at times, or other times, it's 10 doctors on a panel talking about, ketosis and how that affects epilepsy. You know what I mean? So like,
Yeah.
it's, I'm not going to lie. A lot of the corporate stuff isn't very glamorous in terms of, but I mean, we do some large shows that can be kind of fun, and you do like award shows where you get to do a lot of flash and trash with lights and loud music and stuff. So it's, it's just a different way of doing audio, but I mean, just still, all the physics are still there, all the same gear.
So I used to work with a company in Phoenix that we did a lot of corporate events similar to that. And we did high dollar proms where we'd come in and we'd set up a full nightclub in a school gymnasium, and 30 by 30 foot roof with moving heads. And I was the lighting guy at the time. And so I have a lot of history.
I'm sorry. I'm just kidding.
Right. So I wish I would have known more about audio back in the day, because had I had that passion then, I would be a lot further along. But anyways, what I was getting at is some of the events that we did one that was at the federal courthouse. We had to get background for all of our employees to come in and bring stage and lighting in. And you've had the opportunity to work doing the inaugurations. I can only imagine what kind of security you have to go through and what kind of a setup and tear down an inauguration is. Can you maybe break that down for us, what it's like to go and set up and do that event?
Sure. Yeah. And I just want to clarify one thing from the intro, where my bio is kind of written. IMS doesn't do the inauguration. That's Maryland Sound. I used to be able to say the last four. I missed out on this one. I was supposed to be there right
Chris
before
was there.
Christmas.
Chris was there. Rabbled. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Because of Gaga. Yeah. But I was supposed to be there. I got cut right before Christmas. Because of COVID restrictions, obviously they cut the audience size down, and so they cut out a bunch of speakers. And so up until Christmas, I thought I was going to be there. But besides that, it's an insane event. To me, there's not a bigger stage, if you will, of an event with the prestige that it has, in my opinion, in this country. Right. So to be able to have been a part of four of them is awesome. Just, being a system tech. Security wise, you typically do your background checks and fingerprints a couple months ahead of time. And then it's a second round of fingerprints and photos and stuff once you're on site for the day of. So it's like you get a construction badge for like the building. Like we start loading in, the whole platform that they build the inauguration on, that starts about 3 months before the inauguration even begins, because that whole facade obviously is not normally there. Audio comes in about January 2nd and works every day all the way up until January 20th is the day of the inauguration.
Wow.
Multiple rehearsals. There's just thousands of, cables to run, hundreds of speakers to place. And no matter the weather, you're out there every day, all day, that whole time. So, and then day of show, there's a different badge you got to get through. There's a different badge if you're on the inside, which is what I was doing last time, doing comm. I got to put microphone on Chief Justice John Roberts and Clarence Thomas, things like that. So it's a really fun, unique event for sure.
Well, I can't even imagine just as regarding the setup, because not only are you providing a feed for, TV, you're doing, I'm sure the delay on that pavilion area is huge. So just trying to get everything dialed in has to be a complete nightmare.
Yeah, we spend, I wouldn't say nightmare. I mean, it's all very strategic, there are hundreds of speakers, both up on so not even the forward facing ones that face out towards the audience, just the speakers that are facing all of the people in those grandstands. I mean, there's a couple hundred people up there. There's a distributed speaker system under the main platform. There's 125 little speakers under, one every other 3 seats on that main platform.
Wow.
And then in rings around as the balconies go up there are speakers in the railings. So you have to kind of time align and tune all of those. It's just very systematic. It's like anything in audio, you do one thing, right? You do one channel, you do one input, you do one speaker, and then you just keep going down the line, just keep doing that, however many times it takes to do that. And then the delays, you do your first speaker and then you go on to the next, you go on to the next. And so, it can seem daunting, I guess, but I mean, it's the same process that you would do in a little ballroom. You're just doing it 100 more times or over longer distances.
Yeah. The Super Bowl event with 800,000 people has to be kind of similar but different at the same time. When the Seahawks won the Super Bowl, I was DJing kind of down in the area where they had the big event, and a million people around. It's got to be crazy to try and set up and plan for an event like that as well. Did you have one main stage and then go down and run down the street as well, or what was the Super Bowl like?
Yeah, the Super Bowl Super Bowl victory parade was incredible. So we are the company I'm at now, IMS. We're the Eagles. We're their provider. So in their stadiums, like typically like their concourse levels and their club levels. There we go. That's what I was looking for. They have corporate events all year round, right? So we do events for them all year round. We do like their autism walks and things like that. So when it came time for them, when they were a week out from the Super Bowl, we got the call that says, hey, if we win, we have to be ready for a parade. And they knew that I had done work with like the inauguration and things like that. So I had done events of this scale, because being this was Eagles' first Super Bowl, they expected it to just go insane. And so we had 1 week to plan what would normally take months to plan. It was just one stage. If you're familiar with the Rocky Steps, there was a stage right on the Rocky Steps. And if you stand on the Rocky Steps and look out towards Philadelphia, it's about a clear mile shot to what's called City Hall. So we go down for the site visit, and I'm like, all right, so where do you expect people to be so I can know where to put speakers and point them? And they're like, everywhere. I'm like, okay. So I'm like, all right. So like I started making like these heat maps of like where I would think people would be and start designing the system. The system was over a mile long. So I had delay speakers basically after I got the first oval area. About every 400 feet was this giant pole with 2 hangs of speakers, shooting out across the different areas. But the last delay tower of speakers was over a mile away. That was a lot of delay time, right? So you have to what's called time align these speakers so that when you that way it's not like a bop 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 when someone speaks. It all kind of moves at the same time, so we had to prepare for a whole week whether they were going to win or not. So we had to be ready Monday morning to go to start loading in if they won, because the parade's going to be on that Wednesday.
Wow.
And so I never cared more about a football game in my life than watching that. I'm actually a Ravens fan. I'm from Maryland. But since I've been in the Philly area now for the last 10 years, I was like, okay, I can root for the Eagles on this one. And so I designed a system. I was able to mix it. If you are a football fan, the Jason Kelsey speech was a pretty epic, speech. I was heavily riding the gain knobs on that because he was just eating that microphone. And it was an intense event. I mean, the people. Yeah, 800 some million. It's hard to tell how many people were there, but I mean, it was massive, and there's definitely nothing like it.
Well, so how does that work when you do have that much delay or that much ground to cover? Is it basically, I guess, opposite of delay? So the guy is speaking in real time and it's being transmitted, this full mile away, but it's got to hit the back people at the same time he says the thing. So is there a sort of a reverse delay where he's speaking and they're actually hearing it in the back first or something? How does that work?
No, I mean, the idea is, so if you didn't put delay, it would be instantaneous. Like as soon as he said it up front, you would also hear it a mile away, but then you would hear it again because air doesn't stop moving, right? So the speakers from the front are still pushing air down. So you would hear it multiple times. And so if you didn't delay all the speakers to the front, and so what it is like, so if he spoke out of the first speaker, the time it takes the airwaves to move from that first speaker to the next speaker, you have to put that amount of delay time in so that basically the next speaker is picking up where the airwaves will meet it at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So technically the people in the back, yes, are hearing it later than the people in the front. However, if you didn't actually delay the speakers, you would hear multiple repeats of the same word.
Got it. Yeah, no, that's what I was trying to figure out is, if he's speaking, I mean, is he saying something, but because of the delay so that the people in the back are hearing it at the same time, like if it was, I don't know, sort of going in reverse order or something. So, but your explanation is perfect. I get it now.
Yeah. It's crazy to just all the moving parts in any type of system like that. Just the time.
And that's the thing is, I mean, I've been a part of, festivals and stuff like Mike, you and I went and saw Kings of Leon up at the Gorge in Washington. And it's the same sort of thing, right? They've got a delay. They've got a crowd of 120,000 people or whatever it is. So they've got the different tiers or the different rings around the stage. So I understand it in principle, but I mean, a mile long, that's pretty bonkers.
It's a lot of delay. So to speak even further, we had to stack delay. I mean, typically the units that you would use to do these delays aren't, I had over 3 seconds of delay by the time it was at the end.
That's insane.
And they're just not even made for that, right?
That's a lot.
Normally you're dealing milliseconds.
Milliseconds. Yeah. Like if I'm like in a theater or in an arena, we're talking, I never hit a second, let alone 3 seconds. So what we did is there was a certain point where like the first speaker for the main road started, like we delayed the signal for that standpoint and then restarted the signal from there, starting on that already delayed time. So you're putting delay on top of a delay and then doing delay in the amplifiers as you went down the way to kind of like stack the delay, because typically over 3 seconds, you don't normally delay that much.
That's
right.
so crazy.
But the person speaking is hearing themselves in real time via monitor or something, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't feel weird, because I guess if you were speaking over that delay, it'd be really hard to keep with it.
Yeah, and sure, there's reflections, right? There's major buildings everywhere. You're going to hear it, but I mean, for the most part, you're hearing a direct sound right next to you.
Very cool.
So that's an amazing gig. That's pretty crazy. I always wonder what it'd be like to set up a system like that and have that kind of just craziness going on. Most of my stuff is pretty small, so in comparison, I've done pretty good sized stuff. But
maybe this is just another technical question, but I mean, like, are you physically running cable a mile away? Like, I mean, are you running a hard line that way, or do you start dealing with wireless stuff, or is there another way of moving audio from A to B?
Yeah, sure. So where we would hardwire. We would use fiber basically to run to kind of each tower, because you can run fiber, thousands of feet. It's not a problem. As far as there was a certain point down what's called Broad Street. Actually, it's the Parkway. where we used RF, radio frequencies. We were kind of transmitting it like a radio station, if you will, and had antennas at each tower. So you had like a local generator powering a local amplifier for that speaker cluster, and also it was like an LED wall there, so people could also see what was happening. So that was like a big transmission that was shooting down. So a good bit of the delays were picked up what we call RF or radio frequencies to go down the way. Because you could have done it over fiber, but the problem is you got to run that cable. You either got to string it up or you got to run on the ground, hope it doesn't get cut, things like that. So, yeah.
Well, and that I think was the thing. I mean, in my head, I was envisioning the world's largest snake running from the soundboard at the front, something that runs a mile down the road. I was just like, I couldn't figure it out. I was having trouble wrapping my head around it.
I mean, but if you want to think about different contexts, so Times Square New Year's Eve, which I've also done, they take up that whole section. That's all hardwired. They don't do any RF in there in terms of the speaker transmission. So, they start on December 26th and they're every night and they're running fiber from like light pole to get to each tower. So, I mean, it could be done. It's just a matter of time and resources.
Okay. Well, and then I guess, speaking of resources, you didn't have a lot of time to plan this thing. I guess was it Maryland Sound that did this one, or was it the
IMS?
So this was IMS.
So does IMS have all this gear just laying around in stores? Obviously you're going to have to set aside some gear so you're ready. Like, how does the technical aspect of just gathering equipment work for something like this that may or may not happen?
Yeah, so it's a pretty common thing in the industry to sub-rent or partner with another company, right? So, while we're not technically set up at IMS to do events like this, I could partner with MSI. And so, like, the other thing that MSI had were these things, we call them the poles. You see them at the inauguration, you see them at Times Square New Year's Eve. They're these 40-foot poles that you can hang speakers from, as opposed to having to build a big SCAF tower. So MSI brought in 14 of those for me. You can only fit 4 of those a flatbed per truck. So, there was, I had over 250 what they called, JBL Vertec
I like the Vertex
boxes.
Yeah.
And these are big boxes, right? So like the boxes are dual 15s for the low end, 4 8-inch drivers for the mid driver. It's a big effing box, right? And I had almost 300 of those, flying in the air for this gig. So
I can't even imagine.
It's all about having resources, I'm still good friends with the guys at MSI, and we trade gigs back and forth as we can. So that's just part of the industry.
All right. And just like that, we are done with 2021. It is a new year, and hopefully it's a good year for everyone. Thank you for being patient with me being in class. And let's give a big round of applause to Ryan for holding down the fort and keeping the show alive while I've been gone. So thank you, Ryan, for doing that. And thank you to everyone that has listened to us all year long and who keeps listening to us and supporting the show. You guys are amazing. We wouldn't do it if we didn't think we were helping people. And people that listen and share are, you're the reason we're doing this. So thank you. And stick around for next year. We already have a bunch of interviews lined up for the first section of the year. And if you know anyone that would be a good interview, or you want to have us, a subject matter you want to have us cover, let us know. We're down to talk about anything. So thanks again, and we will see you guys next year.